I talked about some of the crazy and bizarre people that you encounter in the martial arts self-defense world in my previous video. Somebody asked me for another story, so here goes. Many years ago, I was teaching a private class in Brussels, and that was in a gym, public gym. Now, the person I was training, we rented off the big aerobics room, and that's just a really big, wide open studio where we had plenty of room to work. And it was clearly marked off as okay, private, stay out. There was a big paper on the door saying that private session going on, can't come in, and so on. We were doing sword techniques, and what do you know? All of a sudden, this relatively big, muscular guy walks in and comes straight towards us. So obviously, I stopped teaching, face the guy, and just wait for him to speak, which he immediately does. And he asks, "Okay, what are you guys doing?" And I said, "Oh, we're just doing some Tai Chi stuff." I immediately downplay things a little bit because if you clearly ignore the fact that there's a private session going on and you feel like you're entitled to walk in anyway and start talking to people, clearly you have a slightly different way of perceiving reality than most people who would just respect that and stay out. But so obviously I'm a little bit wary and paying attention to what he's going to do. And he says, "Oh yeah, I'm a boxer." I'm like, "Okay, that's really good." And I don't say much more. And he, "Do you want me to attack you with the sword?" And he makes a move to grab the sword out of my hand, which I immediately pull back because I was paying attention at the distance between us. Didn't let him get too close, and I already positioned myself a little bit in a bladed stance just in case. Nothing too obvious, but it allowed me to get the sword out of his reach very quickly. I said, "No, that's fine." And he repeats that he's a boxer, and he repeats the request, "Want me to attack you with a sword?" And he tries again to grab the sword out of my hand. Same thing happens. I make sure he doesn't get to do that, and say that no, we're good, we're fine, no help is needed, and so on. The anticlimax of the story is that he very quickly figures out that okay, there's nothing that I can do with these guys. They don't want to play. I don't really engage him in conversation. I just respond to his questions and leave it at that. And if I recall correctly, I said, "Look, we got to keep going," and he took off. The whole thing takes about 2 or 3 minutes, maybe a little bit more. Point is this: if somebody feels entitled to just basically barge in on a private training session, regardless of what it is, that's one thing. If you see two people with swords in their hands and they're practicing how to work with these weapons, which you could see from the outside because it was a big glass wall, so you could see us. There was no other way to avoid that. And you're like, "Oh, I'm going to meddle with that." If that's your first reflex, your reasoning process is a little bit off, to put it mildly. And that was the case here. When you're training, when you're teaching, this is something you should always expect. There's a reason why I don't train in public parks. Many times people have asked me to when I go because I'm a personal trainer, I go to where they live, and they ask, "Oh, would it be okay if we train in a park, do our Tai Chi in a park, or do our kickboxing or Muay Thai in the park, and so on?" I'm like, "No." Why? Because I know what happens. There's always, especially in the big cities, it draws attention. There's a bunch of idiots who show up and want to get involved. In particular, those people who are already training. And worst case scenario, it ends with somebody actually wanting to fight you. Best case scenario, it's just annoying that they always try to, come up and talk to you and interrupt basically a lesson, which I'm paid for to teach at that moment in time. So the person I'm training is not going to get what he wants, and I'm going to be always very careful in how I approach these situations because I don't want it to escalate. Where you live, if that's not the case, awesome, great. Where I live, this is actually not necessarily a concern, but a factor that you have to take into account. Same thing when you teach in a class. I've had a bunch of people show up over the years in my class and just do dangerous stuff, do stupid stuff, and so on. That one time when we were in one of the places where I was teaching was a big rec center. We had locker rooms, they were shared with everybody else. There were a bunch of them, and there was a bunch of indoor soccer players that were on at the same time that I was teaching class. So at one point, after class, we go back to the changing rooms, and gonna get a shower and this and that. So I put my bag down with my swords that are neatly stored and so on. But you could just see the handle, and there's one guy, he immediately, one of those soccer players, who comes just, oh, awesome swords, and he makes a move to grab my weapons out of my bag, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And he couldn't understand when I basically chastised him, like, this is not your property, this is mine. I'm not going into your sports bag and just taking out your soccer shoes. I'm like, oh, awesome shoes, and just grab stuff that doesn't belong to me. B, these are weapons. You have no idea how to handle them, which is clear by the way that you approach this stuff, and just want to grab somebody else's weapons like that. And if you start acting the fool and swinging around with them, and all of a sudden you hit somebody, or you lose your grip and it flies through the air and hits somebody in the face, guess what? Somebody's going to want to talk to me why I let that happen, why I wasn't more responsible in the way that I stored them and avoided this problem altogether. They're not going to look at. They're going to look in the second place also at the guy being an idiot, but then they're going to look at me like, okay, why didn't you stop this? Yeah. So how do you stop this best? Don't let the guy even touch them. Don't touch somebody else's stuff. And you would think that this would be obvious. You would think that this would be common sense, like there's somebody who has a sword here. I actually had multiple swords and sabers with me then. Like, okay, that is by default, these are weapons. By default, that is dangerous. Oh, I'm just going to grab that stuff and see what I can do with that, even if I've never handled these kind of weapons in my life. If that's your process that's going on inside your head, again, you need help. You need somebody to teach you that actually this kind of stuff is dangerous. It's the same thing if you see somebody operating heavy machinery and you're like, oh, I want to play with this thing. No, that's how accidents happen. You have no idea what you're doing. It's dangerous. Same thing if you go to a firing range and you're like, oh, can I see your gun? And you start grabbing it and shooting it. It's like, no, don't touch somebody else's stuff. That and so much more are examples of how people just do the wildest stuff when they know that you do martial arts or train in self-defense. And this is a constant. I've been training for a very long time, over 35 years, and throughout all that time there's been so many incidents like that where people feel that they need to come up to you and either explain to you how what you're doing is wrong, or just insert themselves into training sessions, or like the examples I give here, want to attack you. Hey, can I grab your sword and attack you? No, you can't. You don't go to a firing range and you say, hey, can I grab your gun and shoot you? You don't do that. That is nonsense. It's stupid. Sadly, like the saying goes, surrounded by idiots, it happens all too often to be true. So the overall message of this video is that if you practice, if you train, especially if you teach, you have to be on the lookout for these kind of people. They will eventually show up. Depending on where you are, that's going to be a common occurrence. If you're lucky, not so much. But you have to be, especially as a teacher, you have to be ready for this kind of stuff, which is one of the many reasons why I usually, when I meet people who don't know what I do, I just don't mention it. I say I'm a personal trainer, I do fitness and conditioning, and that's it. And eventually when they do find out that actually martial arts and self-defense is my passion in life, then they're surprised because I don't talk about it. Because, like I said before, after all these years, having to answer the same, basically dumb questions. Oh, have you ever killed somebody? Have you ever hurt somebody? Oh, you must be dangerous. The kind of nonsense. Like, okay, I'm 51. I don't have time for that anymore. Just go bother somebody else with that. I turn into the old cliche of Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino, sitting on his couch and yelling at young kids to get off his lawn. I'm turning into the grumpy old bastard. So be warned, young people. All right, that's it, folks. Talk to you next time. Bye.